All right, welcome everyone to the Xojo webinar. I'm Paul Lefevre, the Xojo Developer Evangelist. And in this webinar, we are going to be talking about Raspberry Pi and how easy it is to create Raspberry Pi apps using Xojo. That's a very exciting day. Why is it so exciting? Well, let's see. Lots of things happened today. The new Star Wars trailer is available for watching, which I've seen many times now. But that's not the real exciting thing. Guitar Hero Live comes out today. Also, I'm very excited for that, but that's not the real exciting thing. The real exciting thing is that Xojo 2015 Release 3 shipped. Of course, that's the most exciting thing that happened today. And with it, we added the ability to create 64-bit apps and the ability to create Raspberry Pi apps. So what is Xojo? For those of you that are here that are not familiar with Xojo, I'll just briefly talk about that. Is a multi-platform rapid application development tool. And you can see right here, see how rapidly that showed up on the screen there. You get a nice designer where you can lay out your UI. In this case, there's a window here. You can drag controls from the library. You get the left-hand navigator side where you can view the things that are in your project, and it allows for easy editing and whatnot. Xojo's multi-platform, so it can create apps for desktop, web, and console on a variety of operating system targets, including Windows, OS X, and Linux. It can also create iOS apps for iPad, iPhone. And that's an example of what the code editor looks like when you're writing Xojo code. And starting with Xojo 2015 Release 3, we now have the ability to create Raspberry Pi apps. These are part of Linux, essentially. It's a special target you pick on your Linux build setting, but you can now create Raspberry Pi apps. And you can create desktop Raspberry Pi apps. You can create web apps that run on a Raspberry Pi, and then you can view the apps in a web browser on the Raspberry Pi or on another computer that's on the network. And you can also create console apps. Xojo for Raspberry Pi starts at $49. That is for the console version. If you just want the version that creates desktop and console apps, that one is, actually it's just desktop apps now I think about it, that one is $99. And then the regular full versions, the $299 version lets you create desktop, web, and console apps. And the Xojo Pro license, and if you already have Xojo Pro, good on you, because that includes the ability to create Raspberry Pi apps without any additional cost. You can check that out in the Xojo store. Also available as of this morning is the Gpio module that is on GitHub. That is a Xojo module that you can use with your Xojo Raspberry Pi apps to communicate with the Gpio port on the Raspberry Pi. And we'll be looking shortly on how to actually use that when I wire up a circuit here on that other camera for you later. And you can find that on GitHub here. So we're just going to jump into a few demos using Xojo so you can see what it looks like. I'm going to give a very brief overview of Xojo itself. We'll run a desktop app on a Pi. And then we'll create a circuit to make an LED blink, and then show how the what Xojo code you can write that will do that sort of thing. And then we'll look at some other Pi stuff. So let's fire up Xojo here. All right, so here I have Xojo open, and I have the Xojo Notes project open. This is an example project that's included with Xojo. Xojo itself includes over 300 example projects. When you first run Xojo, you're going to get this little project chooser window that shows up here, and you can see the various targets. You can choose any of these for creating a Raspberry Pi app, depending on the license you have. And if you want to look at examples, you can click on the examples and scan through the categorized list. So this example that's open behind here is the Xojo Notes example. And you can see, I can just run this right now on my Mac so you can see what this looks like. And you can see this just has a window here, and you can add notes. that sort of thing. It's a pretty simple app to show a couple windows and some of the UI controls. And this sort of thing is created using Xojo here by dragging controls from the library here on the right-hand side over to the layout area. And you can just click on controls, drag them around, resize them, that sort of thing. You can expand things here to look at source code. So it's very friendly, easy to use, pretty obvious how you're going to be doing things. And because Raspberry Pi is one of the targets, you can just come down here and check it. So you can see right here, I have the build settings section. I've checked Linux as Raspberry Pi runs versions of Linux. And the new thing you need to do over here is you now have some architectures you can choose. And I mentioned Xojo now has 64-bit available. And in the case of Linux, there's also a third option for ARM 32-bit. And this is what will run on the Raspberry Pi. And when I say Raspberry Pi over and over, I'm specifically referring to the Raspberry Pi 2. Xojo apps will not run on the original Raspberry Pi. That thing is far too slow to be able to handle the stuff we're doing. And the compiler we're doing, the open source LLVM compiler, does not actually target the chipset used in the first Raspberry Pi. Luckily, Raspberry Pi 2 is tremendously faster than the original and still very inexpensive. So it's definitely worth upgrading if you haven't already. So once you've selected your architecture, you just build your app. And your app gets built. And let's find that app over here. So here in the Xojo Notes folder, where the project is, there's a builds folder here, and we can see the Linux ARM folder has Xojo Notes in it. And I can just drag this built app over to my Raspberry Pi. This is FTP. Raspberry Pi has it built in. So I've just dragged this over here, and it's FTP'd it over to the Raspberry Pi. And then I can get Finder up on the screen, theoretically. Where's my Finder? All right, I don't know where Finder is, so now I gotta hide stuff. Oh, look, there's Finder, hiding. All right, so with Finder open here, I am just going to use the connect to server option. And I'm going to connect to the Vnc server that I have running on my Pi. I am running the Pi headless. My Pi is running headless right now, so I don't actually have a display hooked up to it. But it is on my local network, so I can connect to it. And you can see it here. And you can see the Xojo Notes project that I copied over is sitting in the webinar folder that I created. And I can just double click to run it. And you can see it looks pretty much exactly like it did on OS X. So I didn't need to do any code changes. So this is one big benefit for people that have already created apps or that need to create apps that they want to run on a bunch of different computers, really. By and large, your apps are not going to need significant code changes. Sometimes they won't need any code changes, as in the case of this one. All right, I can close that and select that one. So that's what a desktop app looks like running on the Raspberry Pi. Pretty straightforward. This particular Pi has been upgraded as running the latest version of Raspbian. It's Jessie, I believe, is the version. But stuff also works on the version before that, the Wheezy version. All right, I got a couple questions here I'm going to jump to before we move on. So I got a question from Dan asking if the Raspberry Pi apps will run other ARM Linux systems like Beaglebone, Black. I'm not familiar with that one, but our technical requirements are just that the computer has to be using an ARM v7 CPU. I think also a Cortex-A maybe also might be compatible with that ARM v7. So if it's using that particular CPU and it's running a version of Linux that has all the libraries that we need for our desktop stuff, or if it's not running GUI and it's just console, then it ought to work just fine. But yeah, it'll definitely run on more than just Raspberry Pi, but we're at this point primarily talking about Raspberry Pi because that's the most commonly known one that's out there. Edwin is asking, are all the ARM-based Raspberry Pis supported? And as I mentioned, it's the Raspberry Pi 2, and I suppose any newer ones. We haven't heard anything about them creating new ones, but specifically the Raspberry Pi 2 with its quad-core CPU. Kato is asking if the compiled code running on the Raspberry Pi designed for the professional market, referring to the Pi Compute Module. I don't know what the Pi Compute Module is. The code that Xojo creates is compiled using the LLVM compiler. So I would presume it would be perfectly fine for this sort of thing, but without knowing specifically what that is, I can't say for sure 100%. And Jay is asking, will that run without the desktop manager? Well, the desktop Xojo Notes app that I created absolutely needs the desktop manager. But if I just created a console app, which we will do when I use it to make the LED blink, then no, I don't need the desktop manager. I just SSH into my Pi and I can run the apps that way. Vlachislav is asking about Windows 10 on the Pi. Is that supported? No, we do not support Windows 10 ARM at this point, only Linux ARM. Let's see here. Edwin is asking, can you make the Raspberry Pi appear as if Linux isn't running? So maybe boot to your own splash screen and automatically start an app. So it acts like maybe a standalone device. Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, Linux has full capabilities to auto run apps at launch. So as long as you Google around to find the config files you need to modify, you can certainly do that. And if it's just a console app, that's easy enough. If it's a desktop app, obviously the desktop will have to be something that starts, but then your app can start and then be running without the user having to manually find it and start it. Well, so many questions. We'll be going on a long time tonight. All right, that's fine. I just need to scroll up because they're scrolling off my screen. Jens is asking, is it possible to use the HTML viewer with the Pi? Yes, the HTML viewer works with the Pi on Wheezy. I haven't yet gotten it to work properly on Jessie yet, and we're not entirely sure if that's a problem with the Jessie libraries or if it's a problem with Xojo, so we're still investigating that. But it does work with Wheezy without any trouble. The only thing you have to do is install the libwebkit library, but we've got the code for that on our doc site. Let's see here, where did that question go? Ronaldo is asking, oh, he scrolled off, can we still use other Xojo components like Serial on the Pi? Yes, Serial should work just fine on the Pi. The Pi has, like 4 USB ports, which should all work fine through the Serial class that's included in Xojo. Jason is asking if there's special libraries that are needed specifically. The libraries that are needed are noted on our system requirements page. I don't think there's anything too specific. I don't have them off the top of my head, but I'll bring up the system requirements page later at the end, and you can scan that to see. For the non-Pi, for people that are running general Xojo desktop apps on x86 Linux, they run on a wide variety of versions of Linux, so it's pretty compatible. C. Milano is asking if there's no remote run at the moment. No, not at the moment. We are working on that. That should be showing up in an upcoming release. It will be great to be able to do what we have. The term is remote debugging, which allows you to press run in the Xojo IDE, and it will ship the resulting app off to the device for you and kind of run it in debug mode without you having to do that manual FTP copy that you saw me do. All right, Matthew is noting there's some commands to modify the starting app. I'm not going to try and read those out loud because they won't be too helpful. Certainly, take advantage of our Xojo forum, we now have a Raspberry Pi channel in there. So if you're new to Xojo or new to Raspberry Pi, you can head over there and ask questions. There's lots of people that have been using Raspberry Pi for a long time and are familiar with its Raspbian version of Linux and can give you all kinds of advice. Mark is asking if it will support the touchscreen. I think I recall during the beta that someone said that the apps were working on the touch screen, but I do not own one of those touch screens just yet, so I haven't played around with it myself. But I don't see why it wouldn't work. The touch screen probably is just operating as another input device, so it ought to work fine. Jay is asking, are there I2C SPI libraries available? I'm not familiar with what those two things mean, so I don't know. Maybe someone else will be able to offer some clarification, or maybe Jay, you can clear that up for me. But we don't have anything specific for that I'm aware of. All right, you know what I want to do here real quick is see if I can switch this video over to the Pi so that now you're still looking at me again. Sorry, everybody. The video button doesn't have the switch to camera settings, so I gotta do it this way. All right. All right, let me find my next questions here. Bruno's also asking about the remote debugger. Coming soon, not available yet. All right, Chuck is noting that the Pi compute module is a daughter card variant of the Pi, but it's built with the older Pi system on a chip. So yeah, Xojo will not be able to work with that, I'm afraid. Santiago is asking if the Xojo TCP server example works on the Pi. I presume that would. TCP socket is available on the Pi. I don't know why the example itself wouldn't operate. Chuck is noting that the touchscreen does work great with Xojo apps. Darren Smith is asking if you can connect to Azure MySQL on the Pi using Xojo. I don't know if much about Azure MySQL. We don't offer a MySQL, sorry, I keep saying MySQL, it's referring to Microsoft SQL Server here. We don't offer a Linux driver for Microsoft SQL Server, so we don't have one on the Pi either, but if there's alternate ways to connect there, then I would presume it would work the same as it would on any Linux installation. All right, going back to an earlier question regarding the I2C SPI libraries, apparently those are related to the GPIO communications that Matthew is clarifying for me. And we do include an open source GPIO module that works in conjunction with the Wiring Pi library that allows you full access to the GPIO port to do stuff that you want. All right, and Jason is noting ODBC is probably the best way to connect to Microsoft SQL Server. And SPI should probably be supported by Wiring Pi, and that is what we're using. I am not 100% sure if the SPI stuff is in the Wiring Pi Xojo module, but it is on GitHub. I'll get you guys the link momentarily, so you're welcome to check it out. And I'm sure if it's not in that initial setup, enough people are going to be using this thing that it'll probably show up pretty soon. All right, I think I made it through a bunch of those. Phew, question gauntlet right there. All right, now I'm going to show you how to create a simple little circuit here, and then we'll look at some Xojo code that will use it. All right, so I just get to switch over here. Sorry for the little shakiness. My little rig here is quite the handmade thing, so I got to my webcam is mounted on a lamp that is pointed down here at this table that has all my Pi gear. So you can see here, and I'm facing away from the screen when I'm doing this, so I won't see your questions for a few minutes. So you can see right here, I've got a Pi in its case, cover off, ribbon cable connected to the GPIO port. This particular Pi is a Kit, I think is the one I ended up getting. And then here I have a very tiny breadboard. The ribbon cable is connected to the cobbler and then plugged into the breadboard. This very tiny breadboard doesn't leave me a lot of room for wiring. So the first thing is I need my trusty reading glasses so I can actually see these tiny little holes on this thing. So wiring this stuff up is the same as anything else, but we'll go through this for the benefit of people that aren't all familiar with this sort of thing. So here I'm going to wire up an LED, and then we'll use Xojo code to make the LED blink. So I'm going to start by connecting it to pin number 4 here on the Pi. Grab my little LED. LEDs have one end that's longer than the other, and the longer end is the positive end, so that needs to go next to our power lead, and then we can put the other end in down here, anywhere I can fit it on my tiny breadboard. I did get a bigger breadboard that's sitting off here to the side, but I haven't had a chance to switch the cobbler over to it yet. All right, so I've got to slide this stuff over more. So I got the LED plugged in there. Now we just need to take a little resistor. I got to run that. Make sure I push these things down enough. And we're just, at this point, we're running everything to ground. So I'm just going to connect to the ground section of the breadboard. And then I can wire this over here to a ground pin. Doesn't really matter which one I choose. So that's my little rinky-dink circuit. You can test the circuit by connecting it directly to power. So I can pull this pin out here and I can just tap it into the direct 3.3 volt power. We can see the LED turns on. So our simple circuit was connected correctly. So that's good. So that is a very simple circuit here. So now I can switch back to Xojo. And you can see what the app will look like. So I'm going to leave that video on and share the screen again. And I think that will leave a little window up for you guys so you can see both the shared screen and the Pi itself at the same time. All right, so here I'm going to go to the LED Blinker project. This project is also included with Xojo. And you can see right here, I've already added the Gpio module that's also included with Xojo and is available on GitHub, like I mentioned. This module has lots of methods that map to the Wiring Pi stuff, so you can always refer to the Wiring Pi docs for how these are to be used. But our little example here is just a console app, so it just has some code in the run event handler. And as you can see here, this is not a lot of code, but this is kind of the hello world of Raspberry Pi apps. You just make your LED turn on and off in a little loop. So the first thing you do with Wiring Pi is you call the setup GPIO method. Here I set a constant to tell it that I want to use pin number 4. And I tell it that pin number 4 is going to be used for output. And then I have a simple while loop that turns the pin on by using the digital write method, waits about half a second, and then turns it off, waits half a second, and it keeps doing this over and over. And that's it. And that has the effect of making the LED blink. Not the world's most exciting project, but it's a good example. So again, you just have to make sure you have Linux selected here, and then that it says architecture ARM 32-bit over here. And then you can build. And if we go back to our FTP, we can see our project right here. I can just drag it over. And because this is not a desktop project, I can actually just SSH into the Pi to run it. As long as I remember what folder names are. So you can see here, there's the app. Now, when you're accessing the GPIO port, you generally are going to need to use sudo. And you see the LED is now blinking. Actually, the new version of Raspbian, the Jessie version, does allow you to not have to use sudo. You can set an environment variable. Again, I have this in the docs. And then if that environment variable is set, then you don't have to use sudo each time. You can just run the app. So that is that's a little handier. Always remembering to put sudo. If you forget to put sudo, I think it tells you, did you forget to put sudo? Yeah, there you go. Did you see? That's Linux being helpful for you. Isn't that great? All right. Edwin is noting a reminder to make sure that you don't use the wrong voltage, so you don't melt your LEDs. And you can see on the example I made, this was connected to the 3.3 volt one. The first time I was testing this, now I'm not an electronics engineer, electrical engineer. This wiring stuff is kind of new to me, so figuring this stuff out, I was a little excited when I got it working the first time. But the very first time, I forgot to put in a resistor between LED and ground. And a bunch of you out there are probably laughing at me now because, yes, I melted my LED. It went up in a puff of smoke. My little office here stunk for like an hour until it got aired out. So yeah, don't do that. Make sure you know a little bit about these circuits you're trying to create before you attempt to build them and melt things. All right, Chuck is giving me some Linux terminal tips that I need to write down and use because I don't use the terminal often enough so that I don't have to type nearly as much. I appreciate that, Chuck. I am not the terminal expert. Edwin, not being a Linux expert, is asking what sudo means. Sudo is a Linux command. It means superuser do, which means you need to run the command with higher privileges. The superuser in this particular case, which is what is needed to access the hardware directly, unless you have that environment variable set up. Typically, when you do the sudo command, you're prompted for an admin password. Jim is asking, I assume you could build a desktop app too with an LED button to turn an LED on button to turn the LED on and an LED off button to turn the LED off. Well, Jim, as a matter of fact, yes, you can. And we have such an app right here, also included with Xojo. And no, Jim was not paid to ask that question at exactly that moment. But this is the same sort of thing. The code works the same. So you can see here, I can click on the button. It shows up here. I can expand it to see its event handler. And you can see the same sort of code, digital write to turn the particular pin on. And there's other code in here as well that is doing things like using timers to control how frequently things might blink if you turn on the blinking. You can also listen for button presses. I didn't build the other circuit. It has a tiny little button. See, it's so tiny it's hard to see. That you could press and then you can read its state from Xojo. That project is also included with Xojo. So lots of fun things you can do there. The Gpio module seems to provide a lot of access to things. I've got a looking at a little video thing. I got my box of parts and things in here. I actually have a an LED, looks like a 5 or 6 line LED that's in that pile of things that I need to Google for some docs on, see how I might be able to wire that up. I got other sensors in there. It looks like there's a light sensor and some other stuff. So, in a little box like that with a bunch of wires and various parts, I think that was like $20, $25 maybe. And I think it came with a breadboard, although it came with this tiny breadboard, which I wasn't happy about. So I spent another couple bucks getting a bigger breadboard. All right, so I want to point out some of the reference material we have for you. All right, that didn't switch, so this maybe will. Maybe this will. All right, unfortunately, I have to continually shrink these windows because the toolbar at the top of the screen covers up the buttons and I can't see what I'm clicking. All right, so first of all, if you go to our Dev Center, that's developer.xojo.com, we have a section here on Raspberry Pi. Got an overview for people that are new to Raspberry Pi and don't really know much about it, with some links on where you can buy things for it. If you need to use HTML Viewer, this is the command to install it. You can have some code to check if the web browser is a Raspberry Pi web browser. Some other commands here to update the OS. And SFTP works great for transferring files. It's speedy and easy enough to use, often built into the operating system. And of course, you can SSH in for console apps. I like having VNC set up so that I can go right to the desktop and run stuff from there. Because as all of you saw here, I'm more of a desktop guy than a command line guy, because apparently I like my mouse. And we also have the Gpio module. There's just a little sample here, but we've got some lengthier samples here as well. And this is the command line, not the command line, the environment variable you can set so that you don't have to use sudo to access the Gpio stuff. I got a list here of links to the Wiring Pi library that maps to all the stuff that's in the Gpio. There are links here. Now that I think about it, I do not think these two are implemented in our module just yet. That SPI and the ITC that was being asked about earlier. The blinking LED that I just showed you here real quick, I have a very detailed step-by-step tutorial, including the parts you need for people, again, that have never wired up anything before. So you can go through this step-by-step, carefully reviewing each step. There's also a video at the end that you can watch as well. And we also can enhance that circuit with a button that you can click, and then Xojo can read whether the button's pressed or not and make it turn the LED on and off. And then they also have a little bit of information about the desktop app. So lots of stuff here for Raspberry Pi to hopefully get you started. We also just added a new channel to the Xojo forum for Raspberry Pi. So if you have questions, comments here, you can ask away. And I will click this link right here because our good friend Bjorn Eriksson of Einhuger has created on his blog here, you can visit this or go to the forum and find it again, all kinds of tutorials and guides for how to hook things up to the Pi and interface them with Xojo. And his are way more advanced than mine, probably because he actually knows what he's doing. So he's got some cool looking stuff on here. I haven't had a chance to go through all of these just yet. I don't have all of these sensors myself, but so a lot of cool stuff there that you can check out. All right, let me just check the question window here. All right, Edwin is asking, can you install the app without sudo? Just install it. Yeah, the app doesn't require sudo to be installed. If ever, you can just copy the app over and run it. If the app doesn't use GPIO, it doesn't need any special admin rights or sudo rights. You only need to do that if you're accessing the GPIO hardware port. Kevin is asking, the size of the console LED app was about 1 meg. How large is the windowed app? Well, let us see. So there you go. 2.6 plus the contents of the libs folder. All right, and let's go back to Keynote. I think I showed you the, where's Keynote? Here it is. I think I showed you these links here, but the main Xojo Raspberry Pi page is right here. You can, oops, I guess it's going to come up. I don't know what that did. Let's go back and not click on that. All right. These are the developer.com links that I just showed you, but you can find those easily enough just by going to developer.com. And that's pretty much it. Making Raspberry Pi apps with Xojo is wicked easy. If you haven't used Xojo before and are used to other tools, Xojo is very easy to kind of get a hand on, especially if you have any programming experience whatsoever. But its other benefit is if you don't have a lot of programming experience, it's not nearly as intimidating as some other tools might be. So it can be a great way to get started with creating Pi apps that's perhaps a little less painful for people that are not, full-fledged software developers or programmers. Let's see here, got a few more questions. Let's go through those. And yeah, by all means, if you have questions, ask them now. Happy to answer anything I can. Jens is asking, it's not necessary to use changemod 755, name a program. No, the execution stuff's already set properly when the app is built. So just dragging it over, everything's going to be retained. So yeah, don't really need to mess with that. Richard is asking, do web apps run well on the Pi? Well, they run, and whether they run well depends on what you're trying to do. The Pi is, not a high-powered computer, even though it does have quad cores. So it can get a little slow. I mean, just even using the Pi in general with its built-in web browser, just trying to surf the internet is a little slow. And my son told me that the Minecraft that comes with it is also a bit slow. So the Pi is no speed demon, but web apps themselves run perfectly fine. We've run all our examples on here without any trouble. You can, once you get the web app running on the Pi, which is a standalone app, you just go into console and start it. I can connect to it from my Mac or PC or whatnot, and it seems to operate just fine at that point. Edwin is asking for good places to store system prefs. Well, that's more of a Linux thing. I don't know if Linux has great system standards for that sort of things. Folders in the user folder are what I commonly see. But there's other Linux folders that are appropriate for that. I don't really know off the top of my head, but maybe some Linux experts will chime in. Richard says he was thinking of using a Pi as an app server to instantly deploy on a network. That ought to work fine. File transfer from and to the Pi seems pretty speedy to me. Dan is asking if Xojo apps can use multiple cores with multiple threads. Xojo apps can use multiple threads, but by default do not use multiple cores. They use what's called cooperative multitasking or multi-threading. So everything runs on a single core. You can create what are called helper apps. So you essentially create separate desktop, separate console apps, and then you fire those off, and those each run on their own core. So that can be used to get a little bit more performance and out of your cores. Of course, if you're pushing, a lot on your Pi, using up all those cores, the thing's going to pump out a little bit more heat. So you're going to want to make sure you've got everything properly ventilated and whatnot. Matthew is asking if I can show the Eddie's Electronics web app on the Pi. Yeah, we can do that. Let me just get through some questions and we'll go back and do that. Edwin is asking, is it possible to connect an SSD or a small hard drive to the Pi? You can connect one. I don't think you can boot off it, though. I'm pretty sure the Pi can only boot off its built-in SD card without some trickery. And there is only one SD card slot on the Pi, so I did end up having to get a bigger one. I think mine came with an 8 gig And after the OS install and a few of the software updates and some other things, I didn't have as much space as I wanted. So I bought I think I got a 32 gig. Right. And is it possible to connect to the Pi using Bluetooth? I haven't tried that. I would presume that that could be detected as some sort of serial device and you could talk with it, but I don't have any practical experience with that. All right, let's see. Matthew had asked about, let me just hide this here. Matthew had asked about a web app on here, so let's get one. What I will do here is, let's grab from the example projects, the Eddie's Electronics. Oh, actually, I think I already have that over here. Well, now I lost where it was. So instead, I want this folder, find the right webinar. All right, so I already have Eddie's Electronics here. So what Matthew was asking about was the web project. So let's take a look at that one. So this is the regular Eddie's Electronics web project. I can run it here so you can see what it looks like. So this is a more full-blown app. It's connecting to a SQLite database, showing a map here. I got a list. I can click on things. New information is loaded from the database. Has some graphics, that sort of stuff. So that's what the app looks like. Let's close that. Go back to Xojo. We'll stop this here. So what I want to do here is build it for the Raspberry Pi. Chuck, our new resident Linux expert, is noting that user-specific preferences are often stored in a subfolder named for the app of home directory /.config. Useful stuff there. I'm going to need to contact Chuck and ask him to write a guest blog post or something. All right, let's see here. So that finished building. So we go back to here. We can bring that up. So here we have our build. I can just drag that over here. And I can, well, let's do it on the screen sharing so you can see what it looks like on the Pi itself. So let's see here, Eddie's Electronics. Oh, I built it as CGI. I wanted to build it as standalone. So let's rebuild and retransfer that. So I'm going to delete that. We'll switch this to just standalone. Those seem to do run quite a bit better on the Pi. You know, this is what happens when I do things without my prepared notes. I still have another setting I need to fix. So I'm going to delete more and make sure that's set up properly before I actually run it. So let's remove that as well. So I can't run this on port 80. I want to run this on port 9000. And make sure there's no other setting I'm forgetting. All right, that looks right. Let's build it one more time. All right, now we can head over to the Pi. And I can just start the web app here. So it's now running. So I can actually look at it on the Pi using the Pi web browser. So you can see it comes up here. It's a little slower running the web browser on the Pi, but that comes up fine. If I go back to OS 10, I can connect to that on the Pi, and it'll come up here. You can see OS 10 is much faster from a web browser standpoint. So that came up a lot quicker and seems to run reasonably well. All right, and I'm trying to drag that window. All right, so hopefully that gave you an example. And let me just bring up the question window again. I don't see any questions pending while I was going through all that. That's great. All right, well, the last thing that was on slide page here is my email, so you can contact me if you have questions, paul@xojo.com. Certainly, if you have Pi questions or any questions about the new 2015 Release 3, you can always ask me. You can always ask on the forum. Ask away. And if you're interested in the Pi, by all means, check out the doc pages I showed you on the Dev Center and get started there. Should be pretty quick and easy. And we look forward to seeing all the cool things that people are going to be creating for Raspberry Pi using Xojo. I want to thank everyone for attending and remind everyone this recording will be available probably tomorrow, but definitely soon. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.